So today is Saturday, December 16th. This is our last teisho of the year 2023. And it's also the last day of the Rohatsu in Vermont, where Rose is. And so after today, the Buddha Shakyamuni touching the earth will be taken off the altar in the Zendo and returned to the shrine room. So because the Zendo, we have next week, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday regular practice, and then we're closed until Jukai, the receiving or taking of the precepts on New Year's Eve. I'd like to do a little reading on the precepts from Aitken Roshi in Taking the Path of Zen. But before then, a few haiku on winter, as we'll be closed when winter begins, and we'll reopen in winter, as next Thursday, I think, is the official opening of winter. So these are, I think, Blythe's translations. This series, haiku, in 4 volumes. This is the autumn-winter. There's a summer-autumn volume, a spring volume, and a summer volume. They're really quite incredible. In any case, I want to read you a few things from winter. Let's see. To wake, alive in this world, what happiness! Winter rain. That's Shoha. And the evenings of the ancients were like mine, this evening of cold rain. The winter rain shows what it is before our eyes, as though it were long ago. There is neither heaven nor earth, only snow falling incessantly. That's Hashin. Sorry, I didn't give the name of the last writer. Fields and mountains, the snow has taken them all. Nothing remains. It's a haiku from Josa. Fields and mountains, the snow has taken them all. Nothing remains. There's an introductory koan, 1,000 mountains covered with snow. Why is that one peak not white? This one's great. This is from Basho. You light a fire. I'll show you something nice. A great big ball of snow. You light a fire. I'll show you something nice. A great big ball of snow. Oh, that has so much to it. Boy, that's great. Let's see. Well, here's something you don't see every day in poetry. The straight hole made by pissing in the snow outside the door. That's from Isa. Zen is really about very ordinary things. The great Zhao Chu, I believe it was said something about, in terms of speaking about Zen practice, making water. Even something as simple as this I must do for myself. Making water, even something as simple as this, I must do for myself. No one can do it for you. Let's see. The windy snow falling and blowing around me as I stand here. It's a haiku of Choraz. And now, let's see. Snow viewing. One by one, they disappear in the falling snow. That's from Katsuri. Boy, there's something really poignant about that, isn't there? snow viewing. One by one, they disappear in the falling snow. If you get to be as old as me, that will have a special poignance. One by one, they disappear in the falling snow. As the Cowardly Lion said, ain't it the truth? Ain't it the truth? So, Onitsuro wrote, why are some icicles long, some short? Very Zen thing here. The Buddha on the moor, from the end of his nose hangs an icicle. That's again from Isa, who wrote about pissing in the snow. The Buddha on the moor, from the end of his nose hangs an icicle. And let's see, maybe one or two more. Oh, here's two. Another one from Isa, and then one from Shiki. A bright winter morning, this is Isa. The charcoal is in good spirits. It goes crackle, crack. A bright winter morning, the charcoal is in good spirits. It goes crackle, crack. If you've ever depended on a fire to be warm, you know what that's about. How lovely. How lovely to hear that charcoal crackling. And now this one from Shiki. Winter seclusion. There is something I'd like to ask, Shakyamuni. Winter seclusion. There is something I'd like to ask, Shakyamuni. Maybe you'd like to ask Shakyamuni something too. So, on to the precepts. This is chapter 7 in Aiken Roshi's Taking the Path of Zen. Let me preface this by reading a brief quote from Dogen on the precepts. Without receiving the precepts, one is not a disciple of Buddhas, not a descendant of ancestors. And now Aiken Roshi's chapter is on the 10 grave precepts, but of course in Jukai, we take all 16 Bodhisattva precepts. So it's the 10 grave precepts, which I'll be reading about, plus the 3 refuges or 3 treasures. I take refuge in Buddha, I take refuge in Dharma, I take refuge in Sangha, and also the 3 general resolutions. I resolve to do good. I resolve to avoid evil. I resolve to save the many beings. So those are the added 6, and with the 10 grave precepts creates the 16 Bodhisattva precepts. So fellowship at the Zen Center, he's speaking of the Zen Center, we speak of the Zendo, a much smaller entity, is the microcosm of the fellowship of all beings, all inanimate things, and all unseen elements of unknown dimensions. A deep sense of the Sangha is achieved in our harmony with sisters and brothers with whom we practice. This harmony may be seen in outline in the 10 grave precepts of the daughters and sons of the Buddha. At the end of Jukai, we say, you're now all members of the Buddha's family. So taking the precepts is that entrance. So the precepts as expressions of love is the first point. At first, it may seem that the 10 precepts are negatively expressed commandments, like the 10 commandments of Christianity and Judaism. However, they do not say, thou shalt not, but rather, there is no. That is, in the mind, there is no killing, no stealing, and so on. This does not mean merely that you should attain to that kind of relative condition where you are pure, but that in the mind, which is the universe, the Buddha mind, there is no killing, no stealing, and so on from the very beginning. Some commentaries by Dogen Zenji on the 10 precepts carry the verb must not, but this can be understood to be for purposes of training, as a device to reach realization that fundamentally there is no killing in the mind. You must not kill. Even with their imperative implications, moral injunctions are expressions of love. It is an act of love, sometimes, to say, don't do that. Either way, as a presentation of unity with all beings or as a corrective device, the precepts are expressions of compassion. So we can say that the 10 precepts are simply 10 different ways of showing love. The 10 precepts formulate the realization of inherent good. This good is not the opposite of bad. It is self-nature, Buddha nature. All beings by nature are Buddha. Only their delusions and attachments prevent them from bearing witness to that fact. Precepts are a guide from self-centered delusion and attachment to the Buddha's own full and complete realization of truth and compassion. They point the way to the fulfillment of our own Buddha nature. The application of the precepts. Historically, the 10 precepts, the Eightfold Path, and the other Buddhist injunctions were for the sake of disciples of Shakyamuni Buddha. They were to be applied individually, and all beings might thus eventually be saved. In fact, all beings were saved with the enlightenment experience of each disciple. However, the Buddha did condemn the caste system, and we find implicit in his teachings the futility of suppressing crime through punishment, the link between poverty and crime, and the importance of economic well-being for everyone. He did not live in a time like ours when dangerous competition between nations threatens to blow up the world. He was not faced with the probability of biological holocaust. He did not encounter the righteous imperatives of a feminist movement. I wonder what he would say today. There's that haiku, winter seclusion. There's something I'd like to ask Shakyamuni. Aiken Roshi says, I wonder what he would say today. In the West, we have a clear sense of personal and group responsibility for the government and welfare of everyone, set forth by Locke, Rousseau, and others in the late 18th century, and developed for the next 200 years in democratic societies in Europe and the Americas. Of course, deep irony and sadness, this is all being threatened right now in our own world. Hard to believe, but there it is. As Western Buddhists, we are building on one tradition of social responsibility that has been developing from Moses, Jesus, and Plato, and on another tradition that has been cultivated in monastic settings by yogis, Taoists, and Buddhists, as well as in the institutes of Confucianism, where highest probity was sought. With such a synthesis of traditions, Buddhism in the West is sure to apply the precepts in a new way. In the East, too, we can see new beginnings of the Buddha's social contract. For example, the Sarvodaya Shramadana movement in Sri Lanka, starting from Buddhist ideals, seeks to build self-reliance in villages in matters of public health, public works, arts and crafts. Monastic Buddhism, on the other hand, is clearly declining, and Reformed Buddhism waters down the authentic truths of the founding teachers, permitting the poisons of acquisitive society to enter the bloodstream of the Buddha Dharma itself. It is important that we understand these changes. He doesn't, Aiken Roshi doesn't specify what he means by watered down or Reformed Buddhism watering down, but I think in part he may be referring to the mindfulness movement when divorced from Buddhist tradition. That is, mere mindfulness can be used to do all kinds of things, including, as I think he says in one place, murder for hire. You can do this mindfully. You can also make a killing in business mindfully. But what about the ethical, the precept foundation, which Buddhist tradition has insisted upon? Emptiness is not emptiness. Emptiness is form, which means in ethical life, is the very essence of the path of realization. To remove that is to water down and allow the taint of an inquisitive society to enter the bloodstream of practice realization. So that's my take on what he's talking about there. It's not that mindfulness is a bad thing. It's that divorce from an ethical foundation. Then we leave ourselves open to a really watered down and, in the end, false understanding. So the 10 grave precepts. 1, no killing. There is fundamentally no birth and no death as we die and are born. When we kill the spirit that may realize this fact, we are violating this precept. We kill that spirit in ourselves and in others when we brutalize human potential, animal potential, earth potential. We brutalize with a casual word or a look sometimes. It does not always take a club or a bomb. War and other acts of organized violence, including social repression, are massive violations of this precept. It is ironic that sometimes one can be considerate of the feelings of friends and neighbors while working at a job that directly contributes to widespread suffering. This is one of the difficulties of our society. One can be a stand-up person in one's community and a good friend, etc., and yet be doing work that harms the earth, that harms indigenous peoples, that harms other peoples, that harms children, you name it. All kinds of consequences unwatched out for can spring from the simple competitiveness of a capitalist society. I once had the good fortune, when I was doing a lot of storytelling as a profession, to stay with a couple who had a small salt box kind of house on the Connecticut side of the Long Island Sound near Greenwich. It was a tiny little house right where the water flowed in, the tides flowed in right behind their deck. At the time, that little house cost $1 million. In money today, I can't imagine what it would have been, because this was a good 30, maybe 30 years ago. They were very Irish, they were part of the Irish society, and they were terrific people. He was a businessman with a terrific ethical sense. I was just really floored. He had taken over a new business, and even though whatever chemicals they held in the tanks underground had been tested and shown to be solid, he said, in the long run, these tanks will go, and I'm not going to wait. And at a tremendous cost, he had them all ripped out and replaced with brand new underground tanks, holding vessels, tanks, so that there could be possibly no harm to the environment from the work that he was doing. That meant lowering of profits until they made that money back. But he chose to do that. And I was so impressed with that kind of character. Business doesn't mean you have to be callous. It's just that it's very easy to be callous in that world. So it was really outstanding that this person was not. I was really impressed. In any case, at the other end of the scale, we find giant monks who filter their water in an attempt not to harm microscopic creatures that inhabit it. Recent studies suggest that carrots and cabbages show responses to being cut or uprooted. What can we do? Again, this is in relation to not killing or no killing. The answer is, I think, to eat and drink in the spirit of grateful sharing. I've heard that someone once asked Alan Watts why he was a vegetarian. He said, because cows scream louder than carrots. This reply may serve as a guideline Some people will refuse to eat red meat. Some people will not drink milk. Some people will eat what is served to them, but will limit their own purchases of animal products. You must draw your own line, considering your health and the health of other beings. There was a period, I had been a vegetarian for many years, but at some point I really got myself worn down with the amount of traveling, speaking, and writing I was doing all at the same time. And I was warned I really needed heavier protein. So there was a period where I ate meat and fish and chicken for health reasons. And I have to say, what was interesting is I learned to be really grateful for my food. I found that it was easy enough to be blasé when eating tofu and vegetables to, okay, you bow your meal, but are you really grateful? I found when I was eating meat and chicken and fish, I realized something died so that I would have this specific day. And it made me realize I had to live well on that day. And that's how I would be grateful to that being who gave its life so I would have a healthy life that day. And then when I stopped, at some point I stopped. I decided I didn't want to do that anymore. And I didn't seem to need to. Maybe my schedule had changed and I wasn't exhausting myself in the same ways. But I was able to bring that kind of gratitude for the food I eat back into being a vegetarian. But I found it was easy to be kind of blasé as a vegetarian. And eating meat really kind of put it right in front of me. Something died so I could have this day. Any case, no stealing, second grave precept. There is no stealing and nothing to be stolen. That's the truth. But he goes on, to think possessively is a violation of this precept. Mine. There's a whole Jataka tale, it's a great one, where the Buddha is a monkey and he's captured and brought and is kept by a king in splendid circumstances. And eventually the king lets him go. He's just so sad as this monkey. And the king finally realizes it and lets him go. And he goes back to his monkey people and they ask him, how was it? And he said, it was horrifying. Human beings walk around saying, mine all day. This is my child. This is my tree. This is my car. This is my lawn. And they were horrified. The monkeys were horrified to hear this. And where he gave that talk about what it was like to live among humans in this Jataka tale, I think it's in either Before Buddha Was Buddha or Endless Path, the two books I did on Jataka tales. They're so horrified by just hearing about this, that the place where he gave this talk, which is one of their favorite, like, kind of rock on top of this big boulder, they never went back there. It was ruined for them. Just hearing of this kind of messed up mind that human beings have. So, no stealing. To think possessively is a violation of this precept. The person who steals is misdirected in love and feels the need for something from others. Such a person must build justification for stealing, a structure of innocence, even though everyone is innocent from the beginning. Be true to that original innocence. In other words, don't make up a lie about how innocent you are or how circumstances compelled you. Of course, that's different from the person who steals a loaf of bread because their child is starving. That's not the same point. We live in an acquisitive society where it is impossible to survive without participating, indirectly at least, in thievery. We all know this. Buying groceries, driving our car. In some ways, we're already being thieves, taking from the environment, taking from the welfare of others. It's a very sobering realization. It's like what the Jnan monks or Jain monks did, is wearing a mask, all the time, filtering their water. But at some point, it becomes life denying. We live with the realization that just our living is, drive a car down a country road and you might hit a rabbit, or a bird might be caught in the grate of your radiator, or bugs are certainly smashed against your windshield. You're stealing lives just by living as an ordinary person in our culture. This is a very sobering realization. This cannot be helped. We can only begin with ourselves to express our compassion for all creatures and things. So even picking a flower is a kind of stealing. We pick it as we accept food for our table, which means gratefully, with respect, grateful. Like the precept of no killing, no stealing has its application both in the immediate Buddha Sangha and outside in the workaday world. The Buddha's injunction in the Eightfold Path regarding right vocation urges a life of minimal exploitation. But our habits of consumption support massive and irredeemable exploitation of people, animals, trees, earth, water, and air. We know this. This is hard to be a conscious human being in our world. Gratitude for life itself and for all the gifts. This is when we do our meal, when you think of the meal chants at Sesshin. Being grateful for the food is a ritual that's so ancient. Without food, we die. And to be grateful for each breath. Without air, we die. Grateful for water, and so on. These are important practices that have very ancient roots, and today they seem more important than ever. Great power is generated in support of this precept when people gather in a community and agree to conserve the energy of the universe and protect its beings and elements. And so, one way to maintain this precept is when you're brushing your teeth, turn off the water. Once your brush is wet, brush your teeth. Then turn the water back on to rinse. But don't waste it. Don't let it keep running. The same with pieces of paper. If you can reuse the paper, reuse it. Don't just write a word on it and then crumple it up and throw it away. Zen tradition is very strong on not wasting. This builds our own egotism and builds our sense of separation like a wall between us and everything. It just makes it harder to practice realization. It doesn't make it harder to practice if we choose to, but it makes it harder to practice realization because we've built a thicker wall with our lapse of attention, lack of gratitude for the things that come our way, which means taking care of our shoes, taking care of our clothing. Though they are inanimate things, they are the warm flesh and blood, the merciful incarnation of the Buddha. Incarnations of the Buddha is what Torei Zenji says in his Bodhisattva's vow, which we recite every morning of Sesshin. Take these things for real and work at living your life every day with that kind of gratitude and respect. That's to uphold the precepts of not killing and not stealing. We kill ourselves by wasting time. Nikken Roshi doesn't mention that, but that's certainly something. We kill ourselves gossiping. We kill ourselves, and nothing wrong with television, but if we just mindlessly stare at a TV screen with something we're not even really, same with internet. It's not that these things are bad, it's how if we become mindless in how we use them and just they're medicating ourselves, we're killing our potential for doing something better. We're stealing from ourselves and from the people we interact with because we could be more ourselves in interacting with them if we weren't numbed out. So killing and stealing, upholding these precepts is very fundamental. It's not anything really esoteric. No misuse of sex is 3, the mind. The universe mind, which is the essential human mind, is pure, empty infinity. There is nothing to be called sexual exploitation there. We obscure this purity with clouds of coveting and scheming. Sex is sharing, but when it becomes using, it is perverted, a violation not only of this precept, but of the earlier two precepts of killing and stealing as well, for it involves brutalizing and taking things of others. Like the thief, the person who indulges in casual sex may be seeking to draw something from outside. Another kind of casual sex rises from a lack of confidence in the self. As the agent of the Dharma, it is a kind of false sharing, a prostitution. People who have been conditioned by over-literal Catholic teaching, or have been followers of teachers like Yogananda or certain other Hindu teachers, they come to Zen Buddhism with ideals of purity that interfere with the actual practice. The person for whom sexual purity is a psychological problem has little energy left over for Zazen. Sex is neither pure nor impure. Our attitude about it can either be disruptive or conducive to deep practice. If two people are committed to one another, their sexual fulfillment in each other can be a positive support to their Zazen, and certainly a positive to support to anyone's maturing as a human being. You come forward from a place of caring and a dropping of one's own self-centeredness. This is how we mature as human beings. 4, no lying. Under all circumstances, being true is first and foremost loyalty to the mind, to the emptiness, equality, and distinctiveness of all things. This mind, our mind, your mind, my mind, profound and subtle, appears in the phenomenal world with richness and variety. Efforts to deny or manipulate phenomena and obscure their essence violate this precept, for they set up a structure of justification. A cloud of words and thought in the Buddha Dharma is nowhere to be seen. But if a deranged person comes to the door in pursuit of someone within, I might lie and say the person being sought was not at home. To do so would be in support of this precept, for it would be in support of the intent of all the precepts, which is to save all beings, to dissolve poisons, to realize the Dharma, and to attain the Buddha way. Roshi Kapleau, who had been the chief court reporter for the Nuremberg war trials, war crimes tribunals, used to use the example if a Nazi came to my door and asking if there were Jews within, and I was having some Jewish friends hiding inside, to uphold this precept of not lying, I would have to lie and say, no, there are no Jews in this house. And that would be the absolute truth. And I would have to uphold this precept in that way. Very interesting statement. 5, no dealing in drugs. This precept referred originally to alcohol, but of course it relates to anything that clouds our perceptions. Indulgence in TV. This is, again, no dealing in drugs relates to not killing and stealing, as we've said. Or silly conversation, these days the internet. Indulgence, it doesn't mean use. It means indulgence to the point of losing one's own center, of simply numbing oneself, rather than really being a conscious human being. And of course, in our society, sometimes you need to just get numbed. Let's face it, you come home from a busy, complex day, and you might want to flip on the thing and see whatever's going on until you can settle down or come back to yourself. So all of this, and Aiken Roshi has a particularly, this is, a book that was written a while ago. In any case, he has a particular take, and I think it's robust and precise, but I think in some cases we need to find our own way with it, as he says with eating meat. You have to do what you have to do for your own health. But to be conscious of what you're doing. If you're going to flip on the internet or TV and just be mindless for a bit, then be conscious if that's what you're doing. Just don't fall into it. It is not possible for most people, and I'm going to have some disagreements with him about these next few sentences. He says, it's not possible for most people to do Zazen after even a single glass of beer or a single puff from a marijuana cigarette, so we ban alcohol and dope at our Diamond Sangha training centers. The rules are no holding, no selling or giving away, and no using. So let's stop there for a moment. When I went to visit Nelson Foster Roshi out at Ring of Bone, which is up where the Zendo that Gary Snyder built in the Sierras, I was going to sesshin with him. He invited me to come over and visit an old friend of mine who was a storyteller and a part of that community up on the San Juan Ridge. And Nelson brought with him a six-pack. So we had beers together. When Kaplo Roshi would finish a book, and I was usually involved in working on his new books in some way or other, he would invite those of us who worked on the book and who he was close with to go to his favorite Chinese restaurant, the Shanghai, which has now become a car wash. It was torn down. It used to be a fantastic Chinese restaurant. Oh my gosh. Anyway, progress. Capitalism marched right over it. It got sold when the owners retired, and it's now a car wash. In any case, they would make us incredible Chinese dinner, things that were not on the menu, real Chinese stuff, because they knew Roshi Kaplo and respected him deeply. And then they'd always put a bottle of plum wine on the table. And it would always get shared around little cups. We would all drink a cup of wine together. So there are times for this. And in terms of marijuana, cannabis, we now know that there are tremendously beneficial health reasons, both mental and physical health reasons, for proper use of cannabis products. So Aiken Roshi's take is, I find, stilted, a bit narrow, and needs to be rethought. However, of course, at a Dharma center, neither alcohol nor cannabis would be offered. That makes perfect sense. But in our personal lives, we might find use for these things at certain times. It's not only part of our culture, there's reason to have a glass of wine or a glass of beer with a friend. There's reason for using cannabis products if that's what seems good. So again, we need to think for ourselves, not be infantilized by that's the rule. Find our way with it in an intelligent and respectful way. So he goes on, smoking tobacco can be a problem at a training center. The smokers are distracted by their habit. The non-smokers are distracted by the smell and by their isolation from those who smoke. He adds, fundamentally, everything is empty and one, but we must also consider the setting necessary to realize that essential purity. I was asked to give a workshop at Zen Mountain Monastery some years ago, which is a terrific place in Daido. It's down by Woodstock, New York. Daido Roshi was the teacher there and was a terrific teacher. He was also a heavy smoker, and it was odd to see a Zen center with ashtrays all over the place, because typically what the teacher does, others start doing as well. And so there were a number of people on staff there who smoked. And all I can say is it killed him in the end. He died of lung cancer, well before he might have died and continued teaching. He himself was not afraid of death or of dying. However, it was a great loss, and it was very unfortunate. So all I can say is I don't know about you, but I certainly smoked cigarettes, unfiltered cigarettes, cigars, and I love pipes. But there came a time to not do it anymore. I don't know, Albert Einstein at one point was told by his doctor he shouldn't be smoking. He loves pipe smoking. And eventually he did that. He might put a pipe in his mouth, but there was no tobacco in it, and he never lit it. But there was a comfort in that. There comes a time when the things we used to do, we just don't do anymore. And that comes from paying attention. And that's where the precepts begin to live, to pay attention and realize maybe that's not such a good idea. And then we have the will to stop. So, no speaking of the faults of others. 6, each individual is evolving, and a fault can be the very place where the person can grow. But oh, isn't it tempting to speak of the faults of others? It reinforces our own purity and our own sagacity, doesn't it? I can see through that person. I can see their faults. It's so tempting to judge in that way. 6, again, is no speaking of faults of others. And to repeat, each individual is evolving, and a fault can be the very place where the person can grow. This growth can be encouraged in many ways, but gossip leads to a stereotype and a folklore that divides the imperfect one from the rest of us. It blinds us to the development of maturity that our colleague may be cultivating through the very weakness that we condemn. For example, if one of our friends becomes angry at the least provocation, that angry passion can, with maturity, be channeled into appropriate resistance to social injustice. But stereotyping such a person as angry may hinder our friend from maturing by prompting defensive justification. If the Tathagata is to be realized, we have to give him or her a chance, a space. And the good news is doing Zazen gives us a space to come forward fresh and new each time, and maybe see a person without our typical filter of, oh, that's so-and-so. Just finally see them for a moment. That would be to fulfill this precept. 7, no praising of yourself while abusing others. Another great temptation. This is an extension of the preceding precept, pointing to a pernicious means of obscuring the reality that you and I are each completely individual and at the same time inseparably one in the organism of the universe. Where does the violation of this precept come from? Its source, again, is a lack of confidence in the self as the agent of the Dharma. We seek to appear in a good light to defend ourselves at the expense of others. Is there anyone who's never done that? This does not preclude correcting others. If someone is noisy during quiet time, we help to cultivate the practice with a reminder. The precepts are not narrow injunctions. They always involve a well-developed sense of proportion. This 6th and 7th precepts are the easiest to violate. Thus, we separate from others, falling into the fundamental delusion of humanity. And he puts in a line that's a quote from Robert Burns, but of course, the word queer in it doesn't mean what it means today. But here's the quote from Bobby Burns. All the world is queer, save thee and me, and even thou art little queer. There's the stand of the self-centered self right there. Isn't it true? All the world's a little strange except you and me, and at times even you're a little strange. Isn't that the fundamental perspective of me, myself, and I? In a nutshell? Oh, it's so great. I hope you remember to use that with yourself from time to time as you catch yourself going, boy, that person, and then you're talking to someone you're really close with, and then you go, gosh, they're a little strange too. They're not like me. I'm just right. My view is always just right, but They're always a little strange. They're not quite like me, are they? There you go. Keep an eye out. There's the seventh precept for you, right in your face. 8, no sparing of Dharma assets. Here the Dharma includes the teachings of the Buddha and all other things. The truth is aboundingly manifested about us. Obscuring that fact with self-centered talk and behavior is a violation of this precept. To be free of self-centeredness is to be possessed of a broad and generous spirit that shares treasures from the bowl of the Buddha and the other things that come temporarily into our own hands. Mayazumi Roshi translates this precept as, don't be stingy. When we work on the precepts as koans towards the end of our practice, we go into all the precepts, and it's very interesting. The treasure chest opens of itself. There's no need to be stingy at all. The entire universe. The Buddha had only a begging bowl and a robe and was the richest person in the universe. That is the reality of our own mind and our own potential. Of course, we hardly know it. And so we violate this precept all the time, making ourselves small and wanting things and abusing the Dharma assets of water, air, light, food, friendship, all of it. The sun rising in the morning, the stars appearing at night, the taste of tea on the tongue. The ability to have a body and walk out the door on one's own power and say good morning. Don't be stingy. Don't be stingy to yourself. Still, you count as one among all beings. I count as one also. I might help you to buy a typewriter, but you cannot have the one in my study. I need that for my work. So, there's that. 9, no indulgence in anger. There is actually no anger and no one at whom to get angry. And of course, corollary is no one to get angry. In reality. But in the rather demanding circumstances of Zen training, we find old traumas flaring up anew. So sometimes anger is our total environment. It cannot be helped. Anger is one of the emotions, and emotion is the nature of vitality. If we recognize that our feelings rise from within and are not necessarily justified by what is happening outside, we can change through the acknowledgement, this is my fault. Occasionally, however, we raise our voice and assume a stern countenance. In appropriate circumstances, where the practice of others may be enhanced, this is not a violation of the precept. However, self-indulgent anger freely vented separates rather than brings people together. Closely allied to anger is hatred, or holding a grudge, which is the perpetuation of an anger that somehow feeds the self-esteem, just as greed may feed ego preoccupation, and clinging to error may protect a self-image. Hatred is a poison that permanently sets people apart, creating and justifying violations of all the precepts, smothering any possibility of compassion. 10, no slandering of the 3 treasures. The Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha are above slander. Of course, the slander itself is the 3 treasures, but it takes an opened eye to see this. Wanton slander of realization, the way, and the fellowship may destroy the enthusiasm of earnest students and block their own paths to realization. Gossip can harm the very tissue of the Sangha. Inappropriate behavior as Buddhists can also be damaging. In other words, we're all role models. If people know you're a Buddhist, unfortunately, it's on your shoulders. The way you act, the way you live, tells them something about what that means. That's a responsibility we all bear. In Diamond Sangha, there's no ordination, which means every person bears the responsibility for upholding the Dharma, not just the ordained people. So it's on all of us. As we said, every Zen Buddhist student is, inappropriate behavior as Buddhists can also be damaging. Every Zen Buddhist student is a leader of the Sangha, influencing all other students. But old-timers in particular have an important responsibility. Their action sets the tone at the training center. An important point. If you've been practicing for a while, the way you practice, you're showing up, you're participating in things, sets a tone. There's a responsibility there. You're affecting everything that happens in the Sangha and in the Zendo. The three treasures are brightened or dimmed accordingly in the minds of all of us. I just read one of the most enjoyable Zen books I've ever read. It's called Zen Baggage. It's by Red Pine, who is one of the great translators of Chinese Buddhist poetry and Zen texts. His name is Bill Porter. And in Zen Baggage, he travels through China looking at the places where the first 6 patriarchs of Zen in China were living and practicing. He's a very interesting fellow, but he mentions that, or it might be in his book called Path to Heaven, which is where he seeks out some of the old hermits living in the mountains of China, still practicing today. They're both terrific books. In any case, he says at one of the temples that it was at Wutaishan, the mountain sacred to Manjushri, there's inscribed over the entrance is, the place is not sacred. The place becomes sacred by the people or from the people who come there. In other words, we make a Zendo sacred by participating. It's not that it's there itself, and it's our doing of it that makes the place sacred. So this was inscribed at Wutaishan in one of the temples there, probably in the year 600, something like that. This is an old tradition. So fine, let's see, I think that covers all 10. Final little section, Zen and ethics. I've heard some people say that since Zen says we must be grounded in the place where there is no right and wrong, it follows that Zen has no ethical application. Of course, that's wrong. Kepler Roshi used to say Zen is not above morality, nor is morality below Zen. If form is only emptiness and emptiness only form, then truthfully, an ethical life is practice realization. You don't find emptiness outside ethical living, as if there was no right and wrong. Very, very shallow understanding, if someone holds that. So, but if there were no application of our experience of the unity and the individuality of all beings, then Zen would only be a stale exercise in seclusion, which is a way of death. Yamada Roshi says the purpose of Zen is the perfection of character. It is a way to realize self-nature, and its application lies in the practice of harmony in the everyday world. At the training center, all conditions of the world are present. If you can cope there socially, you're doing well. Now, I am reminded of the story about Bird's Nest Roshi. He was a teacher who lived in the Tang period and did zazen in a tree. If you come up the stairs to the Zendo, it's not Bird's Nest, but it's another monk, you'll see we have a reproduction of an old Zen painting of a monk who was a teacher doing zazen in a tree. I've always enjoyed that since our Zendo is up in the treetops. And we were essentially right now doing zazen up in a tree. So anyway, Bird's Nest Roshi was known as that because he did his zazen up in a tree. And the governor of his province, Po Chu-i, who was no ordinary politician, he was one of China's greatest Zen poets. He was also governor of a province, heard about Bird's Nest Roshi and went to see him. So Po Chu-i found Bird's Nest Roshi sitting in his tree doing zazen. He called up to him saying, "Oh, Bird's Nest, you look very insecure to me up there." Bird's Nest Roshi looked down at Po Chu-i and replied, "Oh, Governor, you look very insecure to me down there." Yeah, which is more dangerous, being governor or sitting up in a tree doing zazen? Po Chu-i was no slouch, but he took it up further. He went, Po Chu-i knew very well what Bird's Nest Roshi was talking about. So he took a different tack and said, "Tell me, what is it that all the Buddhas taught?" Bird's Nest Roshi replied by quoting from the Dhammapada, "Always do good, never do evil, keep your mind pure. Thus all the Buddhas taught." So Po Chu-i, the governor and the great poet, said, "Always do good, never do evil, keep your mind pure. I knew that when I was 3 years old." "Yes," said Bird Nest Roshi, "a 3-year-old may know it, but even an 80-year-old man finds it hard to put into practice." I think often about fairy tales. We make them children's stories, yet how many adults can live up to them in their own daily behavior? How much fairy tales explore the good and evil of human character, and we make them nursery tales, yet how many adults can really live up to the truth of a fairy tale in their own life? Perfection of character comes with the realization of a pure mind, but as Wei Nong, the sixth patriarch, said, with an ordinary thought, you're again an ordinary person. Practice in daily life is the same as practice on your cushions. Check your ordinary thoughts of greed, hatred, and ignorance, and return to your original pure mind. Like Zen study, generally, character change is a lifetime work. And to return to Yamada Roshi's words, Zen study is character change. And that's what it's really all about.